Right. Before I introduce myself, what this talk will be about. So we will cover examples of UI, UX, and UR, what their purpose is, main responsibilities that are in the three disciplines. I'm going to get to explaining what the acronyms actually mean just in a bit. We will not cover how to learn UI, UX, or UR, how to get a job in the industry with those three, how to integrate them into your development pipeline. You can ask me questions about that because I've designed whole pipelines on it, or how to build a team around UI, UX, and UR. Right. So, who am I? My name is Alex. I'm very happy to see all of you here on a Saturday morning. I'm currently the senior UX designer at Riot Games' Hypixel Studios. I'm an avid game jammer and also co-organizer. I help with the designs and websites and stuff like that. I also like to participate a lot. Game jams are amazing. If you want to get into the industry, go and participate into game jams. I'm also a contributor to a community we call We Can Fix It in UI. It's an online Discord community that basically gathers people who work in user interface, user experience, and user research in games, where we share knowledge and we try to help people who want to get a job in the industry as well. And I'm also an avid fan of Cowboy Bebop. I'm currently working on Hytale. So for those of you that don't know, Hytale is a blockable game which basically covers all of the aesthetics, dynamics, and mechanics that Victor talked about in his lecture. So there's a social aspect, there's the creativity aspect, there's the exploration, discovery, everything. Prior to that, I worked at Creative Assembly Sofia, where I was leading the UI UX team, and I got a chance to work on Total War Troy, all of the subsequent DLCs, and Total War Troy Mythos, Total War Warhammer 3, and also Total War Arena, which sadly is with us no more. So, user interface, user experience, and user research. They sound very similar. There's a big difference. I know that it's confusing, but that's why I'm going to do this talk. And hopefully, by the end of it, you have a better understanding of how they actually differ and how they apply to games. So, confused already? You're not alone. Story time. I'm going to take you back to the beginning of 2022, when the world was just starting to slowly recover from a global pandemic, and that was just before a crazy authoritarian dictator decided to uphold everything in turmoil and basically put us back into chaos. But at the beginning of 2022, we were blessed with the release of this title. Exactly. Woohoo, Elden Ring. And what a title it was. 10 out of 10 across the board, must play. Everyone loved it. It was truly an achievement. But it came out, all the critics love it, players love it, but then a certain discourse starts to unravel. I go on Kotaku and I see that there's this article stating that Elden Ring's minimal UI and HUD elements have started maximum dev debates. So I'm like, okay, what the fuck is that about? What do they mean? So start reading the article, and I see that certain people that have become in the numbers of thousands, both developers, players, fans of Souls-like games, have started a debate and a discussion whether actually Elden Ring's UI UX is good or not. Now, I'm not going to talk about whether Elden Ring's UI UX is good or bad, because that's very subjective. But I will use Elden Ring as an example to explain to you what is the difference between UI, UX, and UR. So what do? Well, like any sane person, after reading this, I go on the Bluebird site, which I don't know if it's still alive, it's still out there, might go away in a few days, we'll see. And I start reading the discourse. I'm interested. That's what I do. I do UI, UX. So people don't really discuss UI and UX very often. They usually do it when it doesn't work properly, or when they have some weird expectation of it, or when it's done in a very, very cool way, like in Persona 5. So I'm like, okay, let's see what they're talking about. So we have generally two groups of people in this discourse, as in most of the discourses. We have the group of people which is slamming the UI UX of Elden Ring. We have Rami Ismail, who is like, I generally have not found anything good about the UI UX of Elden Ring. We have this guy who says, I have qualms about Elden Ring's UI from an accessibility standpoint. Status icons are impossible to decipher. And this guy with this very, very thorough opinion is like, every Souls game just has garbage menu UI. Just the worst. Elden Ring is terrible. And then we have the other camp, which is like, they're like, I don't get what the big deal is. The UI and UX has been the same pretty much since the very first Souls game. 4 titles later, it hasn't changed. It's minimal. It works for me. I get it. I have all of the information that I need, right? So, what do? Well, like any sane person does, I decide that I'm going to enter this course because, I apparently don't have anything better to do with my life and my time. So, after reading hundreds and hundreds of these on Twitter and on Reddit, I go on Twitter and I'm like, you know what? I figured it. None of you actually knows the difference between UI and UX, and that applies both to developers and to players. And that's the truth. We're going to see why it is right now. Apparently, that also, started some discussions and some hot takes, but I absolutely vehemently stand behind this statement. The majority of people do not understand the difference between user interface and user experience, and it's not their fault. I mean, there's a lot of confusion inside the industry as well between the two terms. There are a lot of studios and a lot of developers that use them interchangeably, or expect that they're kind of like the same thing, or mix them together and think that UX is all about UI, which is not. But we're going to try and untangle this thread of complicated terms. So let's look at the biggest critiques towards Elden Ring's supposed UI UX problems. And as I stated, I'm not gonna tell you if there are actually problems or not. We're just gonna investigate. So the first thing that we're gonna look at is, wow. Thank you very much for attending my talk. All right, so let me quickly go back. There's gonna be a lot of spoilers. Okay, let's see. Come on. No? Okay. What about like that? Okay, this works. So, the first critique was, well, one of the most frequently mentioned ones was towards Elden Ring's map. And, I mean, this is the map screen in Elden Ring. And looking at it, I'm not gonna blame you for wondering, okay, what's wrong with it? I mean, it's a beautiful map. It has an amazing illustrative style. It has visible markers on it. You can place markers. You can, they call it beacons, so you can place beacons. So that it's actually, more than just orienting yourself, but you can pinpoint and use that for navigation. So there's visually no problem with that, which means that the user interface of the map is actually good. It achieves its intended goal. However, the problem that a lot of people are mentioning is that you open the map with, come on. Okay, I'm gonna do this. You open the map with one button on the controller and you close it with another. And this is true for every platform, because Elden Ring is cross-platform. So on Xbox, you use the See More window button to open it. You press B to close it. On PlayStation 5, you use the touchpad to open it. Thank you very much. You use B to close it. Why is that irritating people? Well, because this is an action that you do quite a lot in Elden Ring. I mean, your map is one of the best ways you can do to orient yourself. And you notice how the two buttons are positioned in diametrically opposing each other, right? So if you want to quickly open and just check something and quickly close it, you can't really do that because that's not how temps work properly. So that was very irritating to people. But the thing is that this is not a failing of the user interface. This is a failing of the user experience, because it's the user experience designer's job to figure out, the controller inputs and the informational structure. Yeah, okay, thank you. It started working, by the way. Yeah, just kind of click, or not. Okay, perfect. It works somehow, fixed itself. So, this is a failing of the UX. It's not a failing of the UI. However, people were using that to state that the UI of Elden Ring is not good. Next, we have the status icons. So, at first hand, it's like status icons. The icons in Elden Ring, most of them are very well drawn, beautiful, incredibly detailed. But it's not about the UI art here. It's about what it actually represents. So one of the problems that people have is that they have no way to tell what those icons actually mean. So their player experience is hindered. And we have 40 plus buff and debuff icons, which can appear at any point in Elden Ring, triggered by either events, items that you use, whatever. And some of the icons, you can extrapolate the meaning of them. You have a sword, obviously that must mean that, it impacts in a way your weapon damage, for example. You have kind of like a scroll, so that must be related to power. But the thing is that nowhere in the game do you actually see those explanations. This is from a wiki. So you have to go out of the game, you have to find a wiki, and that's, breaking, this is where you break the immersion in the player experience already, unless that's intended. And with Miyazaki, I kind of suspect that it might be, in order to figure out what is actually happening to you right now. And then you have some other icons. So you have like 4 red squares, which are in different containers and with different arrows. And good luck telling what does it mean of a red square in a rhombus against a red square in a square, Go figure that out. And then you even have some that you just can't decipher. It's like, temporarily restores HP with successive attacks. Good luck figuring that out here. So, again, not a failing of the user interface, a failing of the UX. Why is it a failing of the UX? Because no one thought about, that's the first possibility. I haven't worked on Elden Ring, so I don't know. So either no one thought about implementing a system that actually allows you to see what icons means, whether that is in a menu or whether you can actually focus the icons on the HUD themselves, or they didn't want to. If they didn't want to, then it's an intended player experience to obfuscate information. But again, this means that it's not about the UI, it's about the user experience. So, why am I not certain if it's the second? Why am I certain? Not certain, but I think it's more of the second. Because in Elden Ring, there is actually a system where you can hover on elements and you can see explanations for them. So if you go in the interface menus, wherever, at any point you can pull up this model from which you can click or select explanation and menu explanation. And that allows you to go over the different line items in the menu and actually see tooltips with what's in there. So this exists as a system, but it's just not applied to icons, to the status icons. Right. Moving on. The HUD. Another very hot topic with Elden Ring. So this is Elden Ring HUD. It's nothing too special, right? You have standard stuff. You have your player vitals up top. You have the enemy vitals below. You have your current items in here, and you can switch them. And you have this little element here. It's actually quite clear, quite simple. So there's 2 things about HUDs. The visual elements that you see here, that is UI. I mean, UI designers said, okay, we're going to represent the health bar as a bar. If you get hit, we're going to remove sections of that bar, right? But it's the UX designer's job to figure out whether all of those elements actually do their job of communicating their states to the players. And the thing is that some players were like, you know what? You're all criticizing Elden Ring's UI UX so much, but at least it doesn't look like that. And this is kind of like, I mean, this is basically a meme that happened where people were like, Ubisoft games, they're full of UI. And I mean, that's, the thing is, it's kind of fun, I get it. I mean, I laughed at the meme. But the difference is that every Ubisoft game in the past 6 years has allowed you to turn on and off every single element on that HUD. Whereas Elden Ring doesn't do that. And why? Because again, user experience. The thing is, giving your players the chance to customize their experience however they want. Maybe they want to strip down everything and they want to have a very pure hardcore experience where I'm gonna orient myself. I'm not even gonna look at the map. I'm gonna take a pen and paper, and I'm gonna, write down all of these things myself. Or I don't have the time for that. I have 3 kids. I really want to play this game. Give me objective markers, So whether you decide to do that and how you represent all of that information, again, that's the UX part of it. The UI part of it is just making sure every single element is actually readable and it looks good and it mixes in. Cool. Where does... one more thing before... I don't have my flow, so you see how this happens. So, user experience. One of the main takeaways so far is that it does not equal user interface. It's actually about a lot more. So let's take another example from Elden Ring. So when Elden Ring released, another problem was that at the beginning of the game, you come at, this is kind of like the intro stage. So this is what you see. And you have 2 pathways here. One of them, very obvious, staircase, blisked in golden light, obviously leading somewhere important. The other one is this little thing here, which is actually a hole in which you can drop down. So, can anyone guess where the tutorial area starts? Okay, guessed correctly. One of you. The thing is that a lot of players actually missed that. So they didn't know, here we have one example, they didn't know that if they jump into this hole, this is where you start the tutorial. And everyone was like, yep, staircases, this is the way. They're gonna fuck with me here. I'm not going down here. So the human players were like, but no, look, we have, come on. Okay. But there's a message, players have left messages here. There's a global message telling you to Cave of Knowledge lies below. And then there's this NPC that says take a bunch of learning. But the thing is, Elden Ring works in such a way that you don't just see this message, you also see like a dozen other messages left by other players, and you don't know if they're trolling you. So you're not sure whether you should trust this message. And here's the deal, like one person at working on Elden Ring thought, okay, I'm gonna give them directions. I don't wanna miss them in the tutorial. But then they didn't test that, and that's where user research comes. They didn't test in real conditions to see that, you know what, actually, when others start leaving troll messages, and you know the one that I'm speaking of, I'm not gonna say it here, people are gonna get suspicious towards this, and they're not gonna go there. And they could actually, even if they don't read the messages, they can see, people are just walking straight there. But apparently none of that happened, so we ended up with a lot of players just missing it. And by them missing it means that we had experiences where people were coming like 30 hours in the game, they're going back and they're like, oh my god, this is a tutorial area, which is just gorgeous. And if you jump down here, a couple of screenshots, boom, you jump down, you get a tutorial. Now, and the tutorials cover some of the most important mechanics in Elden Ring. So if you miss them, good luck on figuring out stuff by yourself. This includes like what sites of grace are and how to do guard counters. By the way, text prompt tutorials, the most inefficient way to do a tutorial. Do not do it. People do not read. It has been tested times and times again. I have tested it myself. People, most of them, the majority, will either skip this, like they just won't read it, or they will read it, 10 seconds later, they will have forgotten what they've read, especially if you serve them 3 or 4 consecutive of these, like Elden Ring does. So, it got so bad, people started complaining, we can't find tutorial areas, they're giving reasons why they can't find the tutorial areas, and it got so bad that they actually patched this. So right now, if you play Elden Ring, and if you start the game, you get you 100% get this prompt, and you have to interact in order to skip it, to learn that if you jump down the hole ahead, you will find the Cave of Knowledge, but there is additional explanation, and there you can learn more about the game controls and basic actions. Right, so had they done proper user research before that, and what does proper user research mean? We're going to learn in a second. They would have known that this was a problem, and they could have implemented a fix for it before they released the game. So, however, wait.
Use a side hop to avoid.
I want to show you another video. Like, Elden Ring is not the only game that at fault at doing player onboarding like that. So we're gonna take this 1 minute and 30 video clip from Negorix. No. Come on. From the Negorix streamer.
Use a side hop to avoid enemy attacks. This will create an opening that you can use. What's a side? Was I supposed to find this at the start of the game? Was this? Oh my god. This is the tutorial. I've done 3 out of the 4 divine beasts, and this is the tutorial. All right, target the enemy, go side to side, and jump with an X. All right, hold on. Target enemy. Are you kidding me? Does this thing just want me to just practice a jump? It doesn't want me to do anything else? Just really wants to make sure I'm jumping? I'm sorry, what now? Do a backflip? You can backflip in this game? Parry at the right time. I didn't know you can charge attacks. Crucial. Calling these skills crucial.
Right. I wanted to use this video in a lecture for so long. It's like when people ask me, what do you do in games? I say, I try not to let this happen. So, yeah. Let's now go and dive a little bit more into the user research, user interface, and user experience of things now that we had some examples. So user research, okay, how do you test and how do you figure out that you have problems in your game? Well, first let's look at the purpose. The purpose of user research, what it is. Number 1, it's about testing your assumptions. You have an assumption, you've implemented a tutorial, you have an assumption that people will find that tutorial. Test it, see if that's true, validate it. Number 2, uncovering problems in the design. So assumptions, quite often, if not validated, lead to problems. Number 3, discover areas for improvement. How can I, make things better for my players and work in the intended player experience? And number 4, learn about the players' behavior. There is nothing better than putting actual people behind the controller or the keyboard or the screen, whatever, and seeing them how they interact with your game. Trust me, 9 out of 10 times designers want to just, start ripping their hair off when they see players actually playing their game, because you cannot predict their behavior. You can only assume what it will be. And what are the different methods of doing user research? We have 2 of them. One is called qualitative, another is called quantitative. So the qualitative method aims to answer the questions why and how. This is about player behavior. So why do players do something and how do they do it? And the quantitative is what and who. What are players doing and who are the players that are doing it? What's the big difference? So the first one, you try to identify issues before you release your game, ideally. Or if you're a live service games, you can do them at any time. Find solutions to them and understand behavior. In the example of Elden Ring, this would have been identifying the issue with the lack of the tutorial area and the fact that people don't understand what status icons are. What can we do about it? And how do people react to those? In the quantitative method, it's all about measuring to inform. So the idea is that quantitative you can do in a lot of different ways. You can do surveys, you can do A/B testing, you can do data analytics. Your end goal is to gather a lot of data from, well, the more people, the better. Statistically, at least 100 people should be included in a quantitative research. And then you use that data to figure out particular trends that are emerging, or to see if certain demographics that play your game might have different behaviors. Whereas qualitative is a lot about testing with players, observing them while you test them. So seeing how they actually would react, and then doing interviews with them in order to extract more information. Now, pros and cons of both. Qualitative is great because you actually see how people play. It's not great because every person's experience is subjective. and it's applicable to them specifically. So you cannot extrapolate larger findings based on that. Like, you can't make a statement that just because one person didn't discover the tutorial area, 20% of our players are not going to do that. Whereas quantitative data can be, well, it can lead you astray. Just because you have a 5% very loud part of the community that's complaining on Reddit that the economy balance of your game is not working as intended and it's breaking the meta, does not mean that the rest of the 95% are not enjoying the current meta. So when you have data, it's about also putting it towards proper pillars that you can see and validate if the data can be trusted. And this is kind of like what a user research lab looks like. So we're going to have people who are inside doing the one interviewee and one person who is who's testing, and then you're going to have an observer that's going to document all of it. And usually when we perform user tests, we record everything from eye movement, hand movement, to the emotional behavior of a person, so that we have more data points to work on. Right, moving on. User interface. Do I have time? I have 4 more minutes towards QA, or 4 more minutes with QA? To QA. Amazing. We're gonna sonic through this. So user interface. What is the purpose of the user interface? Number 1, communicate with and inform your players. Number 2, enable players to interact with the game, because that's what, I mean, that's what UI is. You know, you have buttons, you press the buttons, it doesn't, you make an action, there isn't feedback behind that. And immerse and visually stimulate. And let's go through some examples. So UI, Apex Legends, you have a lot of UI in here. You have a map, you have that's giving you information about your position, you have your teammates' current status, you have what weapon you're using and all that. There's a lot of information going on here, so that's achieving it. Then, no, I want to move to the next slide. There we go, interaction. This is Weird West, sorry. This is Weird West, and the UI here allows you to browse your inventory, check information for it, and equip items to your characters. Number 3, we have aesthetics and stimuli. Persona 5, my favorite UI of all time, even though UX-wise, it breaks all of the rules, and it's very hard to obtain some information in the menus. It's beautiful. So this is how you can use user interface in order to immerse your players in the game and, you know, make a coherent aesthetic with the overall aesthetics of your title. Moving on. What are the responsibilities of people who do user interface design? So they do vector design, high fidelity screen design, high fidelity assets like icons, patterns, textures, etc. They might be asked to do in-engine user interface layout implementation, animation and visual effects in some way or another, typography, some of the tools used by them. Moving on. You're going to see there's a lot of overlap between the different departments, but I have a graph for that as well. User experience. What's the purpose of user experience? Number 1, deliver a fun, and you'll notice here that I've actually striked through, and coherent experience. Why have I struck through fun? Because, as Victor said in the previous presentation, fun is incredibly subjective, and also, you may not want your game to be fun. I don't think that Elden Ring wants you to have fun. You know, it wants to torture you, punish you, and put you toward a big challenge that when you overcome it, you can be like, I'm better than this. You know. Helping players understand the mechanics and ensuring the game is accessible. So, you know, onboarding part. Ensuring the game is accessible means that everyone deserves to be able to play, regardless of whether they have a temporary or a permanent disability. And whether they're a very hardcore gamer or not, everyone should be able to play games and enjoy games because games are amazing. So, as we saw, UX, though, is not only user interface. We have a lot more working points in this. So UX also deals with visual feedback, and this can be the visual effects that you have in the game. This can be the environment, you know, whether you've placed something in a way that actually the player will see it. Yes, the level designers will place it in an environment, but UX is supposed to identify whether players actually notice it and they realize that that's a thing that they can do and go. We have input methods. Again, part of the UX. We saw that with the controller. I mean, whether you use one button to open and close a map or use one button to open and another button to close, you need to test that. Teaching the players how to play, what the system do, Copywriting, text, incredibly important. This is my 30 minutes. I am going to take 5 more minutes from the QA time. And audio feedback. We're going to see some examples. So this is basically a coherent experience and also something that UX does. So in Apex Legends, you have the ping system. So why is this both? It's also an accessibility thing. Why is this amazing? Because you don't have to use voice over communication or text chat to communicate with people that you don't like, but you still want to enjoy the game. So what you can do is you can use the ping system to notify your teammates whether someone's been here, where you're going, whether there's a loot box, etc., etc. And this goes towards building a player experience that says, okay, you can play the game the way you want. If you don't have a mic or you don't want to use a mic and headphones, that's all right. We will accommodate you. Tutorials teaching the player. I'm going to play this 1 minute and 30 seconds video. It's very good. It's from Half-Life 2.
Rise and shine, Mr. Freeman.
Yeah.
Rise and
So I'm going to skip because it didn't take my mark.
I thought so much of B-17 my home.
So
And so, whether you are here to stay or...
So Half-Life 2 did 18 years ago something that games nowadays don't even do properly, and that is teaching the
City
players
17.
the main systems
It's
and
safer.
mechanics of the game. And we're gonna see that just in a bit.
rise and shine.
Also thoughtfully
Wait.
provided by
All right, I'm moving.
our benefit.
Were you the
One of my
only
favorite
ones on the
interactions.
train?
Proud to call City 17 my home. And so, whether you are here to stay or passing through on your way to
Somewhere around here, right? The pick up the can one.
to City 17, it's safer here.
Where is the pick up? Is it coming? Okay, right. No, that's not it. I need to fast forward. It's further down. Ah, there it is, there it is. So, Half-Life 2. You have this particular moment.
Let me read a letter.
Okay. So what do we have here? We have a way to teach the player that they can interact with objects, and most importantly, they can throw objects because, and it's done in a very immersive way because you don't get a text model over it. It is not saying, okay, this is what you press in order to throw objects, and this is the effects that it might have. It allows you to take an object, to throw it. And here you have absolute freedom to decide what to do with the can. You can follow the Combine's instructions and throw the can in the trash can, in which case they will move and you can continue forward, or you can throw it at them and see what happens. And this is also another teachable element in Half-Life, because it tells you that interacting with objects and doing interaction with an object and an NPC might result in actions which may be detrimental to your health. So in the span of 30 seconds, they've introduced some of the core mechanics of Half-Life 2, because it's a very physics-based game. Okay, moving on. This is and the last one that I want to talk about is accessibility. Yes. So this is from The Last of Us Part 2, which is notably named the most accessible game ever. So why is accessible? What do I mean by that? The thing is that it's one of the few games that actually 100% blind people can play. How do they achieve that? In a myriad of ways, by implementing a lot of cool proximity audio features, as well as text-to-speech mechanics and stuff like that. They also have for for people who suffer from very, very blurry vision and reduced vision, they have a high contrast display, which basically puts the game in this mode, and you're like, okay, I see where's the enemy, I see myself. Incredibly important. However, it's not only people who have issues who use those. The survey after Last of Us Part 2 came out turned out that more than 80% of the players used at least one of the accessibility features, which goes to prove that accessibility is inclusivity. It's not only if you need it. Like, if you give people accessibility options, like, if I have no problem with vision, but if you don't give me a way to upscale my text size in a console game when my TV is 4 meters away from me in my living room, I'm gonna hate you for it. Like, I don't want to squint my eyes to read that text. And responsibilities, we've already gone through all of this. I'm not going to cover it. This is roles. So you can see the different responsibilities that fall into these 3 departments. And you can see how amazing our industry is at defining who should do what. It's not. It's not a great example. I can talk to this more about in a QA or after my lecture. Doesn't matter. If you want to learn more about UI and UX, I invite you to go to wecanfixitinui.com, where we've compiled thousands of free resources about user interface, user experience, which include talks, books, lectures, advice on how to get into the industry, understanding UI roles, making your CV, applying to jobs, what types of tests you can get, etc., etc. We also do an yearly salary survey where we publish the results so that you can get some transparency how people are paid in the different parts of the world. And we're currently hiring hypixelstudios.com. I need to make this shout out. We have over 40 positions currently open, some of which are in my team and about UI artists and user experience designers, some of which are in other departments. We're fully remote. If you want to talk about any of these, come to me later. And Q&A, yay! I need some more.
Questions, someone.
I'm here all day, so you can also ask me afterwards.
Hello.
Hey.
So follow up on the beginning of the lecture when you talked about UI and UX in Elden Ring, right?
Yeah.
I was left with the impression that UI and UX are whole separate beasts. However, I turn out to think that your example was this is good UI but bad UX. Is good UI prerequisite for good UX, or are there any examples with sloppy UI but that provides a very, very good UX?
Yes.
It's
RimWorld.
Yeah. RimWorld, so bad UI, good UX. Yeah,
I mean, it's a very rudimentary UI, so it fails to achieve, it doesn't immerse, it's not aesthetically as pleasing as it can be. I mean, the whole game is visually, don't get me wrong, I love RimWorld. RimWorld is amazing. But the thing is that you have a lot of examples where some might go with too minimalist of a UI, for example, just because, for example, it's easier or it was too late in development, but it can have great UX, and it's vice versa. For example, Battlefield 2042 says UI is beautiful, but some players had trouble in the settings menu to figure out whether a toggle is set to on or off because of the way it's presented. So they're intertwined, but one is not a prerequisite for the other. Now, a good UI designer might set up their UX for success by establishing a proper design system that is UX checked first. So if you design your toggle element that says on or off, and it's actually, it's easier to figure that out. And maybe you replicate something that's, hundreds of millions of people using operational systems like iOS, so, like the small circular toggle. It means that probably 99% of the cases, people will not have problem with that UX-wise. So UX-wise, you're not even going to test that because it's a standard practice. It's a best practice. It's already been tested by other people and it's proven that it works. But if you want to go crazy with UI, like Persona did, and you want to make it very weird, then you absolutely need to test it to ensure that, sure, it looks great, but it also behaves good.
I wanted to ask a question about Troy.
Okay.
Being a game with so much information that needs to be related to the player. Can you give us an example of a major challenge that you overcame in your work on Troy?
Yeah, so at one point, when we were doing player tests, our players didn't realize that it's a turn-based game and they couldn't end their turn, which is a big problem in a game that's a turn-based game, not to realize that it's in turns. And we had one tester who spent 40 minutes on turn 1 going through every single other menu in the game and doing what they could in the turn before our user researcher had to intervene and say, you actually need to end your turn. And at that point, I have the video of that. I have it saved. And at that point, they were like, what do you mean end the turn? So that was a challenge. And that challenge arose from one very simple thing. Our end turn button had an icon, which was an hourglass. So it was a beautiful icon. And your assumption would be, if you've played Heroes 3, hourglass means end turn. And that's what we went for. So we expected everyone to know that. But then our player cohort with which we were testing were new to Total War players. So we specifically wanted to see how players who had never played Total War and had never played other grand strategy turn-based games would fare in our game. And what happened is that, well, they didn't. So the solution to that was we changed the icon, because an hourglass to them did not represent ending a turn. It meant that something was in progress or is waiting. Because if you think about it, on Windows and on every other operational system, for more than 2 decades now, you've been taught that whenever the cursor changes to an hourglass, it means that something is currently happening, it's loading, is in process. So you don't associate that visual symbol with the action of ending a turn. So the solution to that was very simple. We removed the hourglass icon and we switched it to a right-pointing arrow, which everyone is accustomed with, because, well, you've all used Netflix or Spotify or any other music player or video player, and you know the arrow with the little rectangle means next. So that solved the issue. But that is one example of that, basically, in Troy. That was probably one of the biggest challenges, UX-wise. Yeah, it's fun, I know. I have a whole lecture written about this, like 8,000 words, and why player testing is important. You can check it out.
Any questions from the audience? No. Okay, we have 2 questions from YouTube.
Oh my God.
Yeah, answer them briefly, please.
I'll try my best.
First one. Persona 5 breaks all UX principles, as you said, to accommodate for design choices. Why can't Elden Ring seem the same way? Maybe that's the way the developer intended us to play? Question mark?
As I said, I do believe that some of the choices made in Elden Ring's user interface and UX are intentional. Like, I do believe that they were like, we're not going to explain to people what the status icons are. Otherwise, they can't do the punchline with the hugging and you having a debuff that you don't realize you actually have. But the thing is that the difference here is that in one case, you frustrate players because of lack of information and inaccessibility, which if it's intended, all right, but you need to understand that you're going to have that frustration. You need to be fine with it. In the other case, in the case of Persona, your aesthetic and visuals are so overwhelming that people don't even have time to think that they can be frustrated or irritated by it. So you increase the dial on one thing to the max, and you basically, lower the importance of everything else. So they kind of obfuscate it. You don't really think, because you open the map and you get the, when you're at the gun ammo shop, you get the cool transitions animations, the gun moves around, and you have the seller who's just sitting really cool, smoking a cigarette, and you're like, this is cool. You don't care about that it's you don't even see an icon of the weapon, and you can't tell the weapons if you don't read the labels on them,
Okay, the next question. How much more expensive would it be for an NPC interaction or a dialogue for a tutorial rather than just showing text to players? Which is more expensive?
Very good question. So the thing is that it's rarely about the cost. It's about when you decide to do a tutorial in the development process. So I'm going to give an example. Dishonored, amazing game, beautiful immersive sim, beautiful player feeling. However, it wasn't until 2 or 3 months before they released that they figured that we actually need to tell our players how to play the game, which is when they implemented the tutorial. And at that point, your system is so complex and there's so many cogs working that you're most likely not going to be able to design a tutorial which is intertwined in your narrative, in your level progression. So what do you do in this case? You put the text, you put the text prompts, number one, or something that's done also, you make a separate level and you put players there. So what Dishonored 2 did is they did both of these things. So they had a separate level, but because they had even less time, the separate level is filled with text prompts. So it's all about, if you plan for your tutorial from the beginning of the game, during pre-production or early production, and you're like, okay, we're going to have these very complex systems, or even if they're not that complex, we still need to explain them. How do we make it in a way that it's actually understandable and you can intertwine them in your overall dynamic, and you can test as early as possible? That's how you end up with Half-Life stuff. Go.
Yeah, on the previous question, don't you think that one of the good options would be to provide players with optionality. So in the case of Elden Ring, to have the options to see the tooltips, and in the case of Persona, to have a strange, weird UI and a more classic UI.
Absolutely, 100%. Like, the best player experience for me is not the one that you intentionally craft for the player, and you're like, if they manage to experience that, that's great, we've done our job. No, the best player experience is the one that you allow the players to create for themselves. Give them the tools to decide whether they want all of those UI elements in their HUD or not, and allow them to craft the experience that they want to have with this game. Because there is no single solution for all of your players, especially if you're working on a game. Even if you have like 60 players, I guarantee you, all 60 of them will approach the game in a different way, and have a different feeling, and they will have different needs and wants. So giving them as many possibilities as possible, like, you know, in The Last of Us, like in Ubisoft games, Ubisoft's accessibility team is doing amazing jobs. Like in recent Sony titles, God of War, Ragnarok, Spider-Man, Miles Morales, Horizon, you know, there's so much customization available that, like, some players won't use it, but those that do, will thank you for it so much.
I'll invoke my host privilege since my mic is working. I got one question. What about Grim Fandango?
Go play Grim Fandango.
Everybody, let's thank Alex Tokmakchiev for the amazing lecture. We're going to take 5 minutes. We'll be right back.